All right. Well, I want to start off by thanking you all for joining today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think most leaders experience, but maybe few openly admit that they have this problem. There are conversations that we know we need to have, but we delay them. And it's not because we're bad leaders or because we don't care, but it's because difficult conversations, these conversations that we want to avoid, carry an emotional weight. Will we worry? Well, will this damage the relationship? Will they shut down? Will it create this tension on our team, right? Well, what if I say something wrong? And so oftentimes we feel like avoidance is easier in that moment. But over time, avoidance almost never reduces the problem. It usually multiplies them. So today we're really going to explore why do leaders avoid these difficult conversations, what avoidance actually costs teams, and how great leaders navigate these moments in ways that it can create more trust, this clarity, accountability, and psychological safety. So this session is not about becoming harsh or confrontational. It's really about learning how to lead courageously and clearly with clarity. So I want to start off with just a quick reflection, a moment of reflection for us. What conversations have you been putting off? Maybe it's that feedback conversation, the accountability, the conflict, those performance, the expectations, the boundaries. And you don't need to say this in the chat or anything. This is just for you. But here's what's important about this. Most leaders don't avoid these types of conversations because they're weak or they don't care. They avoid them because they care. They care about the relationships with their team members. They care about the morale of their team, and they care about how they're going to be perceived. They want to be perceived positively. But leadership requires us to recognize something very important here. Avoidance is often an emotional protection strategy. It's not a leadership strategy. So it protects us from that immediate discomfort while it quietly increases that long-term dysfunction. So we don't want to avoid. Brene Brown says, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. I really think that this quote sets us up for this conversation and it really challenges many of the assumptions we make about leadership because many leaders believe, well, if I'm just avoiding the conversation, avoiding that discomfort, that is kindness. I'm not, we're not being confrontational. But unclear leadership is unkind because it creates that confusion, that anxiety, that assumptions, the resentment and inconsistency. When expectations are not addressed, I think we can all make that assumption that people are filling in gaps with stories, and sometimes it's not positive. I think a lot of the times we most go to the negative, right? So one of the kindest things a leader can do is create that clarity. I like that. Avoidance is an emotional protection strategy, not a leadership strategy. Thanks, Lane. Yeah. So I really wanted to start off with that quote to kind of set us in this mode of clear is kind, unclear is unkind, and think about how we can apply that to our leadership. We're going to start off with a Slido poll, and you can scan the QR code and it'll take you to this poll, or you can join at slido.com and for whatever reason they put a space between the 5 and the 1, don't include that space. But I want to know what makes difficult conversations hardest for you? Saying the wrong thing, hurting relationships, that emotional reaction, the fear of conflict, saying the wrong thing, not knowing how to start, maybe, right? Yeah. So all of these things that y'all are saying right now, maybe there's something else, right? But all of these are are hard because it is about triggering emotion. When we think about difficult conversations, we're really thinking about, okay, it's an emotional conversation. It's something that needs to happen, but it's an emotional conversation that can trigger all the emotions in the world, right? And so I'll be honest, I have a fear of conflict. I don't want to hurt anybody, and I just don't even know what I would say if somebody started like taking my words and being mean back to me, like I don't want to be mean, but but that's how I feel. I'm like I don't want to be perceived as mean. So really whenever we think about leadership, it's an emotional labor whenever we're talking about having these difficult conversations. We have difficult conversations that activate in our brain a fear or uncertainty, or what about the identity that we have, right? Or it creates vulnerability. And that is why learning communication models, they matter. And it helps us really stay grounded and kind of exclude emotions whenever emotions are rising. So, why do leaders avoid them? Well, leaders usually avoid difficult conversations, and it's usually rooted in one of these four things. Well, we want to be liked. Who doesn't want to be liked? You want your team to like you, right? We fear the emotional reactions. You can't control how that person reacts to you coming to them with something that is difficult, right? We fear those emotional reactions. We confuse comfort with kindness. And we hope that the issue just resolves itself. The challenge is that problems rarely improve through avoiding them. What is something that usually grows in silence? Well, we make assumptions, we become frustrated, we have inconsistency because we're talking about one thing, but then we're avoiding some other things. And eventually we have disengagement. And what makes this difficult is that avoidance can seem successful temporarily. So you avoid that conversation and the tension just disappears for the day. But underneath the surface, the issue is growing. And your team knows that that issue is growing. So what's the cost of avoidance? Well, avoidance creates resentment. If you know that you have somebody that you need to talk to, the whole team knows that you need to talk to them, and you're not talking to them about issues that the whole team knows needs to be, uh, you know, said about, well, it can create that resentment on the team. It can create confusion. Why are we addressing this but not this issue? It can create team tension, that team not getting along, that morale of the team, lower accountability, burnout, especially on those that are high performers, and decreased trust. So, high performers notice what leaders tolerate. The team will notice what you do and do not tolerate. When accountability is inconsistent, you have those strong team members who often begin carrying more emotional and operational weight. And eventually that leads to frustration, exhaustion, burnout, and avoidance also damages trust because the teams begin to ask, well, does leadership actually address issues? Do expectations matter? How are we keeping each other accountable? And is that behavior just acceptable here? So culture is not shaped by what leaders say. It's really shaped by those consistent behaviors that leaders allow. So I wanted to bring this back to Patrick Lencioni's model of the five dysfunctions of a team. And if you haven't heard about this book, he's got a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's a really great book. But the first layer is trust. You have to build that foundation of trust. And then that goes into conflict, having that healthy conflict, which leads to commitment, accountability, and eventually the results. But one of the most important layers of this model that I want to talk about today is that commitment, or the conflict. It's the fear of conflict, right? Lencioni argues that healthy teams are willing to engage in that productive conflict around ideas, accountability, and expectations. But many teams replace healthy conflict with what's called artificial harmony. He calls this artificial harmony because it's not really harmony. We we think artificial harmony looks peaceful. It is peaceful on the surface. But underneath, whenever you really start looking at this artificial harmony, it contains maybe unspoken frustration that your team doesn't uh, voice, this passive resistance, maybe even silence, or a lack of accountability. And so here's the progression. We talk about having that basis of trust, and then we have conflict. But when teams avoid conflict, they struggle to make a commitment of what we're going for. And then when commitment weakens, we have accountability that weakens. How can you make people accountable if they don't even know what they're committing to do? And eventually, the results suffer. So leaders sometimes believe that they're creating and preserving this culture by avoiding difficult conversations, but oftentimes avoidance quietly erodes the culture that we actually want. So one of the things that I really enjoy is this quote by Patrick Lencioni. I don't think anyone ever gets completely used to conflict. If it's not a little uncomfortable, then it's not real. The key is to keep doing it anyway. So healthy teams are not conflict-free teams. And whenever I use conflict, I'm not meaning like arguing. We're talking about that healthy conflict where you can voice your opinion, but it's not something against like their character. It's about the work, right? So healthy teams know how to navigate that conflict productively. Then I want to talk about one misconception about psychological safety. One of the misconceptions about psychological safety is that it means just avoiding the hard conversations altogether. And it doesn't. That is not what it means at all. Psychological safety means people feel safe to speak honestly. And again, we're not talking about the character of people. We are talking about the things that need to happen at work. Okay. They also know that any concerns that they have are addressed respectfully. They raise those concerns, they are admitting mistakes, they're asking questions, and those are all going to be met with respect. They have accountability that exists without humiliation. You're not humiliating your team members. And feedback is normalized. We're not saying that any of this is meaning an absence of accountability, because accountability has to exist. And a lot of the times we think it's negative, but it's just like an agreement that we said, you are going to accomplish this, and it didn't happen. That's accountability. It's not being mean. So whenever we're talking about psychological safety, psychologically safe teams often have more honest conversations because trust allows them to engage openly. And avoiding conversations does not create psychological safety. We have predictability, respect, consistency. All of those things create psychological safety. And there's a basis, a foundation of trust. People oftentimes feel safe when they know issues are going to be addressed fairly and respectfully. So, again, psychological safety is not comfort. It is trust that honesty will not lead to punishment or retaliation. If I can say that word today. So, what do you think makes difficult conversations more productive? Emotions, a mutual respect for each other. Yeah. I think a lot of the times we have to just take the emotions out, right? Of um the whole conversation, which is really hard because you, as the leader coming to them with a difficult conversation, you could set that aside. But alcohol, yes, that seems to help a lot of stuff. Vulnerability, transparency, empathy, honesty, facts. Yes, stating facts, respect, mutual respect, honesty, communicate the impact of situation and how it impacts. Yes, facts. Love this. Thank you. Safety. Yep. Got two more participants typing, so I'm going to let them get finished typing. Aiming for let me get over here, for the person's growth. Yeah. Expectations of outcome. We are not venting. Yes. Great. So y'all kind of hit it right on here. So one of the fastest ways to increase defensiveness is to lead with assumptions. Now, Jason talks about assumptions, and we all make assumptions. And I agree, we all make assumptions, but we need to challenge those, right? And that's what Jason also talks about. So use observations instead of assumptions. What we're going to talk about is like, instead of saying, you clearly just don't care, well, that statement immediately would set somebody on their attack mode, right? Their defensive mode. And that attacks identity of them. They just don't care. But instead, state the facts. I noticed the deadline was missed twice this month. So really invite discussion. Well, what happened? Let's try to figure out why this happened instead of accusing automatically. So observations really create that space for discussion, whereas assumptions create that resistance. The distinction matters because difficult conversations can fail before they even begin. And that's because the other person is just feeling judged rather than trying to be understood. So we really have to separate facts and interpretations, our interpretation, and emotions. One of the best books on difficult conversations and crucial conversations is Crucial Conversations. And there's a lot of good material in it. But it says start with curiosity. Curiosity is one of the most powerful leadership tools that we have. So instead of saying, why would you do that? Well, say something like, can you help me understand? What about what's your perspective? What am I missing here? Because I might not be seeing the full picture of what happened. Curiosity really lowers that defensiveness because it really communicates that you want to understand, not simply just accuse them of missing whatever you're going to be talking about. So this really comes directly from that Crucial Conversations framework. And one of their core ideas is to start with the facts and invite dialogue. So lead with curiosity and invite that dialogue so it's a collaborative conversation, not just an attack, or that they will feel like it's an attack. So curiosity lowers defensiveness. There's a lot of different principles and models in the Crucial Conversations book, and I'm just going to talk about one of the models or the principles that they have, and it is called the STATE model. And this gives leaders a framework for navigating some difficult conversations. STATE stands for share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' path, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. So this kind of helps us to slow down a little bit. And because as leaders, a lot of the times we move too quickly from observation, what happened, to the conclusion that they just messed up and there's nothing else that happened in between that. And we're not going to even hear about it. But this model really slows us down. So instead of just saying, hey, you're disengaged lately, you might say something like, hey, I've noticed that you've been quieter in meetings recently, and you missed two project deadlines. I just wanted to check in and understand what may be going on. So if you notice the difference, one is creating defensiveness and one creates dialogue. You're still holding them accountable because they missed those two project deadlines. But it happened, that there's nothing we can do, that they missed it. Now let's move forward. How can we not have that happen again? The goal is not avoiding these difficult conversations. It's to make it more productive, these conversations more productive, so that they don't just go immediately into the emotional side. So we have this observation before assumption, the curiosity before accusation, and we have dialogue instead of defensiveness. Those are the goals. So, what do great leaders do whenever we're talking about having these difficult conversations? Well, they address these issues early. They're not waiting because it's more comfortable to wait. They are addressing these issues early. They're staying calm under emotion. A lot of these difficult conversations carry emotional weight to them. And so we have to remember to stay calm. Lead with clarity. We're leading with the clear facts. We are not just going in with emotion and making assumptions, and that's all we're going to go based off of. We're leading with clarity. We focus on the behaviors of the person, not the character of the person. So we have to be sure, like before you have this conversation, you are really focusing on, is this the character of the person or is it the behavior of the person? And we have to be careful about focusing just on the behaviors. We all have behaviors that are listed in the guidelines of how we work, right? Or we all have values that we all are trying to uphold. Focus on those behaviors. Invite dialogue. It's not just a one-way conversation. It should be dialogue, two-way conversation, and follow through consistently. One of the greatest leadership skills is emotional regulation. So we all have to learn and we all have to practice. We're not all perfect, right? And we're probably never going to be perfect in this, but practicing that. Um, Difficult conversations are rarely just difficult for the person that is being spoken to. It's also difficult for us as leaders, right? So strong leaders learn how to stay grounded enough to create that clarity and lead with clarity without escalating that emotion. Leadership is not avoiding discomfort. Leadership is navigating discomfort responsibly. So I want to spend just a couple minutes applying this. I want you to think about this scenario. A high performer consistently creates tension with others. What conversation needs to happen? This might be one of the hardest leadership situations because the person may be delivering really strong results, but they're negatively affecting the collaboration on the team, maybe the trust on the team morale. And this is where a lot of leaders also hesitate because they internally start negotiating with themselves about this conversation and they think, well, they're valuable. They're a valuable team member because they are always performing at the top. I don't want to lose them. Maybe it's just going to improve. But leadership really requires us to think about the full impact that someone has on the team, not just the output that they have. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts. How would you approach this conversation in a way that creates both accountability and respect? But as you're thinking about this, I want you to think about these 4 questions also. What facts would you share? What assumptions should you avoid? How would you open the conversation? And what outcome would you want? Selene, you said it may be that the person doesn't realize the effect they are having on others and could benefit from shining a light on the blind spot. 100%. A conversation of concern, facts, emails, observations. Yeah. Yeah. The person needs to realize tension is occurring. And so our assumption could be like, they're just a mean person, right? Agree. At TTUHSC, we had a core value, assume good intentions. Yep. I mean, they genuinely could just not realize that they are having that impact on the team. They might just think everybody doesn't like them, and they're like, I don't know what I did. So the assumptions that we avoid should be all of those things, right? Compliment sandwich, yes. Positive output, negative tension, and another positive. Yeah. What would be the outcome that you guys would want on this? Depends on the tension. Is the tension due to the high creating tension is due to doing their job and others are slack? Honestly, you never know, right? These are obviously in this situation, in this scenario, we don't have the whole, vision of what's going on. And as leaders, we may never know the whole situation. Hopefully, person will be open to improvement, the person to realize and take accountability for their actions impacting the staff. Yeah. Teamwork is part of the process. Yep. Reaching the goal individually is not the plan. 100%. Yeah. Thank you so much for your willingness to type in the chat here. So, yeah, we got to be able to focus on those facts, right? We have to be able to focus on not doing anything with the assumptions, or at least working through the assumptions. So lead with the observations, the facts that we know, instead of the assumptions. So when difficult conversations are handled well, what do they create? Well, they create trust on the team, right? People know that situations are going to be handled, the leader's going to be taking care of it. They also have clarity, accountability, a healthier culture, stronger performance, and psychological safety. So it's not because these conversations are easy, but because people begin trusting that honesty can exist alongside respect. And honestly, many leadership problems that we have are not communication problems. Yes, communication is a big problem on teams. We know this, but a lot of the times it's avoidance problems. So think about that as you are thinking about the difficult conversations that you may need to have on your team. The conversations leaders avoid are often the conversations that matter the most. And are you willing to have those conversations so you can avoid the negative effects of that avoidance on your team? That's a big question. So I want you to think about this, and I want you to make it practical this week or next week. I want you to think about your next step. Here's your challenge. I want you to identify one avoided conversation, just one. And then I want you to write down the observable facts, remove the assumptions, and I want you to lead with clarity and curiosity. So we're also going to address it directly. One thing I've learned is that the avoided conversations really consume more of my mental energy than just handling the conversations. Sometimes we carry those conversations in our head silently for weeks or months. I don't know if y'all are anything like this, but I will have conversations in my head. Like, I will try to pretend what they're going to say. And I mean, it never happens that way ever. But, it can carry that emotional weight. So, unresolved tension really always leaks somewhere. It's going to leak into maybe your culture, the communication, the morale, the accountability, or the trust. Courageous leadership does not mean enjoying those difficult conversations because they are hard, but it is the willingness to have them productively and thoughtfully. So, what has avoidance been costing your team? Think about that. As we wrap up today, I really want to thank you again for being a part of this conversation. Difficult conversations are rarely easy, And they're often one of the most important moments of leadership. I would really appreciate your feedback if you could scan that QR code. I have lots of questions that I want answered, and just a little bit of, uh, what is it? Reporting and feedback for our team would be great. So if you can scan that QR code, I'll also send it out. And then if you would like to continue the conversation or have questions, my contact information is here. And thank you again for your time and engagement today.